Hello, welcome back to Hobbit-Sized Readings of The Hobbit, narrated by yours truly, Gregory Jean Conrad. Today we continue reading J.R.R. Tolkien's preliminary masterpiece, The Hobbit, with Chapter 6, Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire, Part 2. But the wizard called them to their senses. "We must be getting on at once, now that we are a little rested," he said. "They will be out after us in hundreds when night comes on, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we have passed. We must be miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon if it keeps fine, and that is lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by." "Oh, yes," he said, in answer to more questions from the hobbit. "You lose track of time inside goblin tunnels. Today's Thursday, and it was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We have gone miles and miles, and come right down through the heart of the mountains, and are now on the other side. Quite a shortcut, but we are not at the point to which our pass would have brought us. We are far to the north, and have some awkward country ahead, and we are still pretty high up. Let's get on." "I am dreadfully hungry," groaned Bilbo, who was suddenly aware that he had not had a meal since the night before last. Just think of that! For a hobbit, his stomach felt empty and loose, and his legs all wobbly, now that the excitement was over. "Can't help it," said Gandalf, "unless you like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to let you have your pony back and your luggage." "No, thank you," said Bilbo. "Very well, then, we must just tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall be made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves." As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat, but the blackberries were still only in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel, and he drank from a small mountain stream that crossed the path, and he ate 3 wild strawberries that he had found on its bank, but it was not much good. They still went on and on. The rough path disappeared. The bushes and the long grasses between the boulders, the patches of rabbit-cropped turf, the thyme and the sage and the marjoram, and the yellow rock roses all vanished, and they found themselves at the top of a wide steep slope of fallen stones, the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went clattering down, and started other pieces below them slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rock were disturbed and bounded off, crashing down with a dust and a noise. Before long, the whole slope above them and below them seemed on the move, and they were sliding away, huddled all together, in a fearful confusion of slipping, rattling, cracking slabs and stones. It was the trees at the bottom that saved them. They slid into the edge of a climbing wood of pines that here stood right up the mountain slope from the deeper, darker forests of the valleys below. Some caught hold of the trunks and swung themselves into lower branches. Some, like the little hobbit, got behind a tree to shelter from the onslaught of the rocks. Soon the danger was over. The slide had stopped, and the last faint crashes could be heard as the largest of the disturbed stones went bounding and spinning among the bracken and the pine roots far below. "Well, that has got us on a bit," said Gandalf, "and even goblins tracking us will have a job to come down here quietly." "I dare say," grumbled Bomber, "but they won't find it difficult to send stones bouncing down on our heads." The dwarves and Bilbo were feeling far from happy, and were rubbing their bruised and damaged legs and feet. "Nonsense! We are going to turn aside here, out of the path of the slide. We must be quick. Look at the light." The sun had long gone behind the mountains. Already the shadows were deepening about them, though far away the trees and over the black tops of those growing lower down, they could still see the evening lights on the plains beyond. They limped along now as fast as they were able down the gentle slopes of a pine forest, in a slanting path leading steadily southwards. At times they were pushing through a sea of bracken with tall fronds rising right above the Hobbit's head. At times they were marching along quiet as quiet over a floor of pine needles, and all the while the forest gloom got heavier and the forest silence deeper. There was no wind that evening to bring even a sea sighing into the branches of the tree. "Must we go any further?" asked Bilbo, when it was so dark that he could only just see Thorin's beard wagging beside him, and so quiet that he could hear the dwarf's breathing like a loud noise. "My toes are all bruised and bent, and my legs ache, and my stomach is wagging like an empty sack." "A bit further," said Gandalf. After what seemed ages further, they came suddenly to an opening where no trees grew. The moon was up and was shining into the clearing. Somehow it struck all of them as not at all a nice place, although there was nothing wrong to see. All of a sudden they heard a howl away downhill, a long, shuddering howl. It was answered by another away to the right and a good deal nearer to them. Then by another not far away to the left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together. There were no wolves living near Mr. Baggins's hole at home, but he knew that noise. He had had it described to him often enough in tales. One of his elder cousins, on the Took side, who had been a great traveler, used to imitate it to frighten him. To hear it out in the forest under the moon was too much for Bilbo. Even magic rings are not much use against wolves, especially against the evil packs that lived under the shadow of the goblin-infested mountains, over the edge of the wild on the borders of the unknown. Wolves of that sort smell keener than goblins, and do not need to see you to catch you. "What shall we do? What shall we do?" he cried. "Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves," he said, and it became a proverb, though we now say "out of the frying pan into the fire" in the same sort of uncomfortable situations. "Up the trees, quick!" cried Gandalf, and they ran to the trees at the edge of the glade, hunting for those that had branches fairly low, or slender enough to swarm up. They found them as quick as ever they could, you can guess, and up they went as high as ever they could trust the branches. You would have laughed from a safe distance if you had seen the dwarfs sitting up in the trees with their beards dangling down, like old gentlemen gone cracked and playing at being boys. Fili and Kili were at the top of a tall larch, like an enormous Christmas tree. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were more comfortable in a huge pine with regular branches sticking out at intervals like the spokes of a wheel. Biffer, Boffer, Bomber, and Thorin were in another. Dwalin and Balin had swarmed up a tall, slender fir with few branches, and were trying to find a place to sit in the greenery of the topmost boughs. Gandalf, who was a good deal taller than the others, had found a tree into which they could not climb, a large pine standing at the very edge of the glade. He was quite hidden in its boughs, but you could see his eyes gleaming in the moon as he peeped out. And Bilbo, he could not get into any tree, and was scuttling about from trunk to trunk like a rabbit that has lost its hole and has a dog after it. "You've left the burglar behind again," said Nori to Dori, looking down. "I can't always be carrying burglars on my back," said Dori, "down tunnels and up trees. What do you think I am, a porter?" "He'll be eaten if we don't do something," said Thorin, for there were howls all round them now, getting nearer and nearer. "Dori!" he called, for Dori was lowest down in the easiest tree. "Be quick and give Mr. Baggins a hand up." Dori really was a decent fellow, in spite of his grumbling. Poor Bilbo could not reach his hand, even when he climbed down to the bottom branch and hung his arm down as far as ever he could. So Dori actually climbed out of the tree and let Bilbo scramble up and stand on his back. That's it for today. If you liked today's reading, please don't forget to subscribe and share the word far and wide across Middle-earth as we continue to bring some Tolkienian cheer to this quarantine despair. With The Hobbit Chapter 6 Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire Part 3. Until then, Pelo nalu ilais engalad gwylin. May the leaves of your life tree never wither. I'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.